Welcome to Security.com, the podcast, where we're bringing together in-depth intel, real talk, and the human side of cybersecurity. I'm your host, Dan Mellinger, and each episode I'll be joined by industry experts, defenders, and voices from the front lines to explore the latest enterprise security insights straight from the pages of Security.com and the minds shaping the field. Today, we're looking at the evolving history of cybersecurity in media and PR as a topic that's evolved from hyper-technical niche counterculture to an SEC-regulated nation-state military strategy. So joining us today is Tony Welz. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks, Dan.
So Tony is a friend and top cybersecurity PR practitioner and one of the W's in W2 Communications. They're a strategic marketing and communications agency that specializes in cybersecurity, and they've been around for 22 years?
Almost 23.
Jesus. I don't know if y'all follow PR. That is a very long time for any agency. Let's jump right in. Tony, you co-founded W2. Can you tell us a little bit about just the agency in general?
Yeah, so I was a little bit of history lesson. I was working at McAfee, Network Associates brand in the 90s.
Yeah.
And my business partner was actually at a firm that we used for our public sector work. I relocated a couple of years later to Northern Virginia. He and I started talking, and he had a friend who was working with Marty Resch, who created Snort, and said, they need a PR firm. I'm conflicted out. How would you like to work with them? Mm-hmm. And started work with them. 12 months later, he and I partnered up. We started building out the agency. And really, we thought it was going to be a small consultancy, and it turned into something a little bit bigger than that. So
still a little bit.
Yep. And so, Sourcefire is a great example of the types of companies we work with, because we started working with them right after their A round, saw them through their IPO, saw them through their acquisition by Cisco, and then stuck around with Cisco for another 13 years. Mm-hmm. So that was a 25-year journey for us, and every stage of a company's life cycle, and any issue or challenge you could imagine, we tackled it with them, which was fun.
That's amazing. And I want to lean into kind of that history, because cybersecurity from a niche into one of the most important topics and markets in the industry today. And you guys have survived, the dot-com bubble, the rise of advanced persistent threats, shift to cloud security. You've seen the industry move from selling boxes to managing national cyber risk. So I wanted to start. So I'm kind of thinking of things in kind of three major eras. And the first one is kind of the early 2000s, right? The niche counterculture. So what was the PR and media landscape like when you were representing kind of the trope, right? The kids in hoodies, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to think about the media landscape at the time, right? We had the internet, but it was still websites, publication websites were still the ugly stepchild, right?
Yeah.
It was still print media was still huge. Mm-hmm. We still have a closet full of framed stories from publications that, we wouldn't dare put them up anymore. But, some of the same guys that I saw this week, Dennis Fisher, people like that wrote for them. Mm-hmm. But they were covering boxes. They were covering speeds and feeds. It was, hey, this thing can do this a little bit quicker. And it was incremental changes with some innovation built in. And it was much slower moving. Today, you've got the 24-hour news cycle. Print publications are gone. Everything is immediate, and that's the biggest shift. And then we've also seen kind of that spread out of the media. It used to be 2 or 3 big media houses. We knew all the people there. We were friends with all the people there. Now we're still very well connected, but it's the influencers. It's the people with a Substack. It's all of these different aspects that give you a broader surface, but also you may not see that big pop that you used to.
Yeah. Less focused, I think, as well, right?
Less focused, but some of them are more focused, right? You've got much more niche. If you've got a really, really niche topic, that's fantastic. There's somebody that's interested in that. Whereas 20 years ago, if you had that niche thing, it was a harder sell.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and can you talk about the coverage, right? It was primarily trade publications back then, right? And they play a huge role now, but in the early days, can you talk about some of the other early ones?
Yeah, I mean, you've had, and there were fewer security-centric publications. So it was, PC Week was covering, PC Week doesn't exist anymore, but PC Week was covering cybersecurity.
PC Magazine.
VAR Business, Info World, and Information Week all had cyber reporters. They were usually the guy that, cyber was a side gig to networking, right? And it's funny because lately we've seen some of those publications come back to cyber with the networking guy, right? So everything kind of comes full circle. But you're right, there was a lot less business coverage of cyber because it wasn't a business issue. It was a technology issue. It was, let's leave that, the CISO barely existed. Most organizations, it didn't, and people didn't know what it was. So it was, we've got a small team of people that buy those products that watch our network, and there was no cloud, there was no anything, right? It was, I worked for a company and they're in cyber, and their network, their message point was, who's watching your network? Right. Think about that today. Nobody's going to do that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And what were the vendors like at that point too, right? Like who were the clients you were working with more so?
Like I mentioned, we worked with Sourcefire, which was an early innovator in IDS, IPS, and then they went on to a bunch of other stuff, which was cool. We worked with one of the earliest, I think it turned into, they didn't call themselves a SIM at the time, but it turned into the SIM market, a company called Net Forensics. We worked at the time, the ISPs were actually getting into cyber more. So we worked with a number of companies that got bought ultimately by Verizon and AT&T and other folks as well. So it was much more niche. If you wanted to get to that business buyer, you went into an ISP or you went to somebody much bigger.
Well, and what were the types of stories that were actually landing then?
It was today, if you get one story on a product announcement, you're lucky.
You're
right?
lucky, yes.
Back then it was like, hey, we announced version 4.2
of this firewall software.
Exactly. And you were competing with maybe 10 other vendors. So they're like, hey, we need to fill space this week. You got, your firewall just got coverage in 5 different trade publications. So it was much more that. I mean, it was, I think the big shift, I think, and I always give FireEye credit, like around 08-ish. They, in my mind, they're the ones that seeded the market in research, right? And there were other people doing it, but they did a good job of packaging it. And it basically got people thinking about, okay, I've got a research team. What can we get from them? How can we nourish that and pull out really good insights? And that was really a big game changer. And that with the rise, I think I'm probably getting ahead of you, but the rise of the breach, that's what started business publications thinking about cyber, going, wait a minute, there's a business impact to this. And this can actually, it's not just a bunch of guys in hoodies sitting in the back room. This actually has impact on our business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you segued perfectly into kind of the next era, right? Like the 2010s, right, is kind of the era of, I'm going to, sensationalize it, but the era of the mega breach, right? You had the high profile, highly covered breaches like Target, Sony, Ashley Madison, and they impacted regular users. They made the headlines for weeks. They triggered, congressional hearings for years. They created new policy. What was the landscape like as it evolved into this more like kind of threat-centric era?
It was interesting because when I started in cyber, it was 1997 or 8. It's in there, right? And it was almost like the company I worked for, it was like the Wild West.
Yeah.
There's no rules because nobody's paying attention.
Yeah.
Right. And then fast forward 15 years, you're in the early 2010s, and it wasn't quite that, but it was a Wild West again because everybody was focused on that next breach. And it was almost like, okay, we got a hit of that coverage. So what's next? What's the next big thing? And there was an atmosphere of maybe not chasing breaches, but there was a lot of coverage on. And there was a lot that went, the industry matured a lot at that point, right? There was less over time, less concern with, oh my gosh, that company got hit. It's like every company's getting hit, right? So there was less shaming of it. There was more understanding of it. There was more of a, hey, we need to come together as an industry. And so that period of time, I think you saw a lot of maturing of the conversations within the business press, especially. Trades were already sort of mature there. The business press actually kind of took a step back, and we started getting those reporters that we have now who they understand the nuance of cyber, they understand what the products do, and they tell it through a corporate lens or a company lens where the average person understands it. They understand the business impact. They understand, hey, this happened and this, it impacted the shipping company, which means the supply chain got messed up, which means this to prices, right? And there was a natural succession. And they started actually, I think, helping companies tell their story better.
I would agree, and it's pretty interesting because it's like there were actual financial repercussions, reputational repercussions, and those drove more awareness, right? Because those stories are they're compelling to hear about, for one, but they actually impacted consumers on a broad basis. So that exposed a lot of people to like, my information is not under my own control, and so now companies had to proactively manage that kind of the risk that they held on behalf of their audience, right, their customers, and help educate on that.
When I think at that time there was like the shaming of the victim. Yeah, I don't want to be the next target.
Yes.
And that evolved into what we have today, which is, look, everybody's going to get hit. Tell me how you're going to protect my data. How, as your consumer, what are you going to do to make sure that my credit rating doesn't drop, right? Or, somebody's not opening credit cards or getting into my bank account. What are you doing there? So it turned into more of a conversation about the proactiveness, right? And the thoughtfulness, which is a good evolution that we kind of went through.
Yeah, well, it was the era of the threat report and threat intelligence groups and everyone building labs, right, and sharing education and demonstrating how on top of the threat landscape and new trends they were. So talk about that. You guys are expert at working with like threat researchers and kind of the interesting personalities that we find in cyber, right? And this was really that main heyday.
Yep. Well, I think part of it for us is, me personally, I'm a bit of a propeller head. And I think we've got an agency of people that we're geeks first and PR people second to a large degree.
And that's why we get along so well. Yeah, absolutely.
So, getting to know the researchers, it's a natural curiosity. And I always tell my team, I'm like, you got to do this job right, you got to be curious, right? And I think the researchers appreciate that. When they think that you're just trying to monetize and package, you're not going to have the same level of cooperation, right? And because that's not what they want to do. They want to build the community. They want to help people.
Well, cybersecurity researchers, if you haven't gotten to work with them, it's a very mission-driven kind of personality. Like, these people want to help, like, businesses get better, people be safer, and so like, there's a natural distrust at first of, I think, PR people, because we come with our own stigmas, right?
Exactly. And you talk to them and they're like, yeah, we actually helped design stuff that went into helping the Ukraine or doing other things. And they're doing these great things. And they're not doing it to earn money, and they're not doing it for fame. They're doing it for the right reasons, right? Yeah. And they want to know that the people they're working with are helping them tell that story for the right reasons.
Yeah.
So,
and showing that kind of authenticity on their side too, which we'll come to a little bit later.
That's exactly it, right? They don't want to be the company shill, and we don't want them to be, right? Yeah. And that's what's exciting about working with them. And you're right. At that time, the threat reports and the threat teams and all of those things came about. Some organizations did it better than others. Some of them did it for the right reasons. Maybe some of them did it for less right reasons. But I think we all got to the same place, which is, the reporters were getting better information, better insight. And ultimately, it wasn't about that one data point or that one report. It was about what's the context of the landscape and what's going on out there, and what can we do to rise the tides and help everybody.
And this is also, now that I'm thinking back on it too, the media landscape during this time is probably when it flourished the most, right? Yep. So can you talk about that? Because we're getting coverage from everything, right? Product a little bit less. It trailed off probably mid-decade, but let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely saw the trending down of product coverage, but you saw the skyrocketing of threat coverage, right? And I think you also saw some of the publications that we still work with today, like Security Week came about. Also, publications that came and kind of went, like Threat Post, that did fantastic work. And fortunately, a lot of their editors have gone on to other things and are doing other things. But you had publications like that were really doing very in-depth analysis of what was happening out there. And again, for the right reasons. They weren't doing it to make headlines. They were doing it to help defenders defend.
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting too, because before, I think the PC Mags and SC Medias were covering it as part of kind of their hardware coverage for product. And then this is the time when you start, they were building cybersecurity beats and actually like having dedicated reporters kind of cover the landscape. Dark reading, some of the niche ones, became global, right? During this time. This is when they really spread their wings. And then you also saw New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Financial Times. They started like building out cyber beats during this time. So give us a little like.
Well, and you've got Dark Reading, which just actually this year is their 20th anniversary. I was talking to their editor-in-chief this week, and they're doing a whole thing on it, right? Looking back and looking forward. And you're right, like it's interesting because we saw this explosion now, and then over the last few years, we've kind of seen a contraction, but also with the contraction, we've seen more of those really well-respected people start out on their own, do their own thing, and go different places, or and start new things. And it'll be interesting to see where we go in the next few years, because finally, for the first time in 7 or 8 years, the New York Times finally hired a cyber beat reporter again, and somebody that's well known in the industry and very well respected. So I think we're going to see another evolution coming of how we look at cyber.
Yeah, it was interesting. And thank you for providing another great segue. It's almost like he does PR for a living. Because I remember distinctly, this is where I came up mostly, right? You saw like them build up, like especially like the more global media entities built up their cyber capabilities probably mid 2015, and then it started to taper back down a little bit. And now we get into what I'm going to call the third era, the strategic era, right? Kind of 2020s to present, where we saw them kind of cut back a lot. And then it became specialists. And I think one of the newest phenomenons, which is really cool, is I think a lot of the really gifted journalists realize that influencer culture and being able to build your own personal brand, because they're highly skilled reporters telling these stories and finding these stories, and having the network to get the inside track on them is very difficult. And they started building their own audiences, and now we're kind of in this era of like the influencer cyber journalist.
I think there's like, it's a little bit different, because there's the influencer community, which there are people that they're mostly practitioners, right? They were CISOs, they were
YouTube
researchers,
demos,
folks like that. They weren't traditional, and they aren't traditional reporters or media, but they're doing really, really interesting work, and they're not going to be a corporate shill. You're not going to say, hey, cover my product. But they are open to having a conversation about, hey, we think we found something really interesting. Do you want to have a conversation? Right? And helping them tell their stories, and them, leveraging our clients as resources, right? So you've got that, but then you've also got publications, as you mentioned, like Dark Reading, who I think they're actually kind of hitting that renaissance too, where you look at the roster of people they have, it's a who's who of reporters that, have worked in the industry for years, and they're now kind of recongealing around certain entities. And I think that's what we're seeing too, where there's a spread out, but also there's a few hubs that are building up where all of these folks are kind of, going to. So
it's interesting. Well, in this current strategic era too, like the stakes have changed, and we've really, it's crazy how much it's matured. But now, right, we have SEC regs for breach disclosure, right? And so like this is a regulated entity. And we're end of March 2026, kinetic war has been started using cyber tactics. So we're seeing nation states using cyber as the first strike in actual like kinetic warfare. So talk about kind of the current landscape now is very, very different. The stories are different too.
It is different. I think, saying they're using it as a first strike is right? We're just seeing it being in the first strike. But it's not uncommon. It's been there. It just hasn't been front and center. And now we're seeing it become that front and center thing. And I think rules of engagement have changed, right? And for the vendor community, that means having to be more agile. Having to really keep an eye on, you've got your research team. Well, they've got to be keeping an eye on geopolitical. They've got to be keeping an eye on what's coming in. And it's a different, for a lot of these organizations, especially the big research organizations, they've already been doing it. But now it's much more common because of where it's coming from. And I think that's the big difference.
Well, and it seems like the stakes are just like higher than they've been, which is crazy because they've kind of like built up over the years. And now it's not uncommon to see just regular reporting on cyber happenings in kind of like the Wall Street Journal, things like that now.
Well, and also it's like it used to be, a few years ago, right? It was this, a random company got hit with a ransomware attack for financial purposes. Now, what we saw in the last 2 weeks, a random company that most people had no idea that even existed, right? They weren't in the mainstream, got hit for a geopolitical reason. And they're sitting there going, okay, I'm essentially collateral damage in a much bigger schema. That's a wake-up call to a lot of folks.
You talking about Stryker with Iran?
Yep.
Well, and what's interesting, like, there's a possibility that Iran thought that they were the government defense contractor Stryker and not the health devices company Stryker. So exactly. Very collateral damage, right? Oh, man.
So it's coming from all angles now, and it's again. When's the last time you saw a headline on ransomware? Like ransomware was all the headlines 2-3 years ago. That's how swiftly this industry moves on, and it's not because it gets bored or it gets distracted. It's because every day there's a new thing that we have to be at the front and center of.
Yeah, well, and I think too, like ransomware, it's kind of crazy. It's become such a common tactic that it's no longer news.
Well, true.
Right? Like, it's a crazy time we live in. But, well, I mean, moving on, like outside of the kind of eras, but like talking about explaining some of these very complex concepts, right? Like, because I think the one thing that's kind of permeated through from the beginning is it's the landscape and the stories have only gotten more complex. There's more interconnecting parts. There's more players. We're not talking about speeds and feeds, right? We're not measuring GPU frames per second, right? There's no objective measurement for a lot of this stuff. So how do you guys explain like these concepts that are core to your clients? Zero trust, supply chains for software. Like, how do you guys break down the complex and help clients tell these stories in a way that's, comprehensive but easy to understand?
Yeah, I think it comes in, again, I go back to the natural curiosity. And we always kind of start those conversations by asking questions and repeating it back and basically saying, I'm not afraid to sound dumb, but this is what I just heard you say. Is that accurate? So that we can repackage it in a way that makes sense to the media. Now, we are lucky because you're talking about the evolution of where we are with the media landscape. The media is much smarter about cyber these days. And there's always going to be that new topic or a new company that you have to explain. But the guys at the Journal, Reuters, Bloomberg, they're coming in with such a deep level of context that you don't, like it used to be, okay, before we call the Wall Street Journal, we have to basically figure out how do we tell this story in a way that this person who was covering, the latest BlackBerry is going to be able to understand this. Now, the guy that we're talking to was just interviewing the head of CISO about what's going on a global scale. They understand, they have the context now. So in some ways it's harder because you have to differentiate, but at least you're not going to zero to try to explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and like this kind of works into the next thing, like the hype problem, right? And so a lot of companies and cyber in general is, from a product standpoint, is very hype driven, right? There's the next silver bullet, and before AI, it was ML, and before ML, everyone was talking about zero trust and like XDR is like the big, like, how do you help companies stand out in a crowd when it's very much a lot of folks saying the same things on the same show floors, right? Like at RSA right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a company yesterday, and they were telling me how different they are and how special they are, and I'm looking above their heads, and there's 3 booths behind them that have the exact same tagline or very similar. And you're sitting there going, okay, we need to sculpt this in a way. And we kind of look at it. We were using the analogy a couple times this week. It's like molding clay. And it's, look, every piece of pottery, it starts the same, but the way it ends up is different, right? Bad analogy probably. But the way we do it is we kind of go, okay, great. Let's break through the tagline. Let's break through all of that. What makes you different? Why is somebody, you're on the same budget line as 10 other vendors, why is somebody going to buy you? And then let's start there and try to tell a story that is credible. It's based in reality. It's based in facts. It's got some support points, customers, data, third parties, analysts that are going to help you tell that story, because so that it's not just you puffing your chest out going, we're great, right? It's no, here's the reasons we're great. And even better, when we have an executive who's willing to go, we're great. We don't do everything, but we're really good at this thing. it buys you a level of credibility. And that's what people want. They want somebody that's going to be an authentic storyteller that basically can go, look, I'm going to bring you on a journey. I'm going to help you understand why this is important, but I'm not going to try to oversell you.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you have any examples where you worked with like a client and you're just like, this baby's a little ugly and here's why, right?
I probably do. It's hard to give those without naming names.
Yeah.
But there have been a lot of it's funny. I have a friend who retired and he ended up working for outside of tech, but he works for a VC and he helps basically them vet. Is this
real?
Is it a worthwhile investment for you?
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? As a PR guy for my entire career, that seems like the dream job for me in retirement because that's what we do every day.
Yeah.
Like we have organizations come to us, and we've had to basically turn them away because we go, you know what? They're not. It's not based in reality. What they're doing, and we really do. Hey, look, we need to sculpt this a little bit differently. We need to take it a different way, and the smart vendors and the smart executives and the ones that are looking at the long term, they're willing to be collaborative.
Yeah.
They're willing to work with us, and we work with them to basically figure out what is that message. What can we do with you?
Yeah.
It's the ones that are a little more short-sighted that are like, no, industry, unfortunately right now, AI.
Yeah.
AI is moving fast. If we don't join the hype cycle tomorrow, we're going to get left behind.
Yep.
And it's like, well, and then you have to determine, is it snake oil or is it real?
Yeah, which is a challenge in cybersecurity in general. But that's interesting. And they probably wouldn't make great clients if they don't, right?
Well, that's the thing. I've reached the point in my career where I can we kind of sniff out, like, we're like, all right, they're going to be a fun client, right? And there's the X factor, right?
Yeah,
it's like it's personality, it's market fit, it's all of those things. And we can we do phenomenal jobs when we're allowed to do our job.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that kind of, again, segues into another thing I wanted to talk about, because like we talk about the talent shortage in cybersecurity, right? Mm-hmm. There's a million unfilled cybersecurity jobs or whatever, but people who are in kind of the marketing, PR agency, that whole world, PR is notorious for losing some of your best practitioners to clients, right? They go work for, a vendor and they're like, you're awesome, I'm going to take you, right? You guys don't seem to have that problem. You guys have a really good core of folks who have been with you for decades, right? And so how do you do that? Because that is very unique in the landscape of PR agencies.
We've got a guy that's been working for us since 2005.
Yeah.
He was like 22 when he joined us, and he's now in his mid 40s or early 40s, right?
Yeah.
And that's crazy to me. But, we've got, people that have been with us, 15, 16 years, 10 years. And, one of our guys is just about to hit his 5-year anniversary, and he came to us, helping us fill a need. Mm-hmm. I think part of it is, I was given some advice actually by the CMO at Sourcefire years ago, and it was, you can always find people that are good at their job. You need to find people that are good at your culture. They need to be a good fit. You need to know that they're going to be able to work with you. And I think we attract people that are really curious, and they want to be better. And they don't want to just phone it in. They want to, they know what the goal is, and they really take the clients seriously. And I think that means a lot. And I think because of that, we've built kind of like a team. It's a team. It's a team environment where everybody knows we rise each other up. We don't compete with each other. We're all in it together. And that's, I think, one of the things that, being in business for 23 years, we're probably most proud of, because it shows in the results. It shows not only are our people loyal to us, but our clients are loyal to us. They come back to us. They move on and they come back, right? And that actually is probably we can have all the wins in the world. Mm-hmm. To me, our people are the win.
Yeah. And to be fair, I had like more questions, but I love how much I want to close with this, because you guys have built such a strong team of like genuinely good people, and that doesn't happen by accident. So like, Tony, you're fantastic. And I think we came up multiple times, but like authenticity kind of shines through. And so if I'm going to plug something, all you and your team, they show up authentically every day. And I think you help inspire your clients. I know you did with us, right? Inspire clients to do the same thing.
I appreciate that.
Which is really, really cool. So any last thoughts before we hop off?
I probably should.
Put you on the spot.
Exactly. I think the PR segment is interesting, and everybody's, especially with AI, it's like, is it dying? Is it sticking around? And I think, it is that culture of authenticity. We're always going to need a human voice. We're always, AI can only get you so far, especially
even more so as everything becomes AI generated, right?
Exactly. And in talking to the reporters, there's a certain piece that AI and all that isn't going to be able to replace. And that's where we like to dig in and find things that are different. AI is great about finding things that are common. Mm-hmm. It's finding the things that are going to help you stand out.
Yeah, that's a great, you crushed the final thoughts here. So that's a wrap of this episode of Security.com, the podcast. Big thanks. Appreciate it, Tony, as always.
This is great. Thank you.
You can check out more insights and technical deep dives at security.com, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show with your fellow defenders. Thanks for listening and watching, and remember, stay sharp, stay curious, and stay human.